Under the dead tree, the wind swirled red dust across the sun-scorched wilderness, whipping at his face as if to remind him that no one would survive this place if they were lost alone. Luke Carter was not a person who meddled in other people's affairs. But that morning, right by the abandoned well, he stopped his horse because he saw three bodies lying motionless under the shade of the dead tree. Three Apache girls. One was still breathing weakly. The other two were unconscious. Their lips were chapped, blood dried around their wounds, and in their hands, a small leather bag, held tightly until they trembled. Luke knew bringing them home could be a problem, but leaving them lying in the sun would be unhuman. When the eldest sister opened her eyes, her gaze was like a knife. She said only one sentence: "If you take us, we will be yours tonight." Dear friend, if this story touches a corner of your heart, I invite you to click the subscribe button. Join me in continuing the dusty, silent, and no less profound Wild West love stories. On the barren redland, under the scorching sun of the far west, the wind blew through the crevices of the rocks and whistled beside the dry cactus. In the distance, next to an abandoned well and an old tree with its bark exposed, three bodies lay motionless, buried in the desert dust. Luke Carter, a man living alone on a ranch in southern Wyoming, stopped his horse when he saw the strange image in the midday sunday. He was not used to seeing people in this place, especially motionless figures. With his hands still resting loosely on the butt of his gun, Luke walked slowly toward them. The closer he got, the more the wrinkles on his forehead tightened. They were three girls. Their faces were dusty, their hair was sweaty, their skin was sunburned. One of them, the oldest, who seemed to be the eldest, was still breathing. She lay on her side, one arm draped over her, the other clutching a small, dull leather bag. Her leg was injured, dried blood caked around the tear in her pant leg. Her eyes were closed, her lips cracked, but her chest was still heaving with weak breaths. Luke knelt down and checked her pulse. It was still there. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly. Her eyelids fluttered. Then, very slowly, she opened her eyes. They were deep black eyes, half asleep, full of fear and suspicion. Luke raised his hands and slowly untied the rope that tied the canteen to the saddle. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help," he said, and brought the mouth of the canteen to her lips. She drank in small sips. Her hand still clutched the leather bag, as if leaving it would mean death. When she regained some strength, she tried to move to sit up, but the pain in her leg made her groan. Luke glanced at the other two girls lying close together, motionless, then back at her. "I can't leave you three here to dry out in the Sunday. I'll take you home." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes were no longer panicked. There was just a little bit of trust. Luke said nothing more. He silently lifted each of them into the saddle, tying them tightly. The youngest was as light as a sack of straw. The one in the middle had a high fever, sweat pouring off her like water. The eldest leaned against his back, her eyes still fixed on the leather bag in her hand. As they left the dry well, red dust swirled up with the horse's hoofs. Behind them, the dead tree stood still, the last witness to an unnamed secret. Ahead, the farm road wound through the dim sunlight, leading to an old log cabin on the top of a hill. Luke tightened his grip on the reins, his chest heavy as a stone, carrying three questions and three lives that he didn't know how to answer. The smell of fire and the shadow of a stranger. The log cabin on the hill appeared in the golden sunset. Luke reined in his reins before the porch, then helped the three girls down one by one. One had a high fever. One was still unconscious. The eldest still clutching the leather bag as if it held the lives of all three of them. The house, which had been silent for years, suddenly filled with a breath heavy with the smell of blood, sweat, and dust. Luke placed an old mattress in the corner of the house and laid each girl down. He did not ask for her name. No one answered even if he could have. The conscious girl, the one with eyes as deep as a stone well, sat with her back against the wall, the leather bag still in her hand. Her eyes did not leave Luke each time he approached. He lit a fire in the stove. The smell of burning pine mixed with the scent of dried cactus. In the old black pot, he put some cornstarch and water. It was a thin porridge, not tasty, but enough to keep her alive. When she brought the bowl to the girl, She took it with both hands. Slowly, be careful. It's just corn, Luke said, not trying to be friendly, not trying to be cold. She nodded. Her eyes were still on his face, then down to the gun hanging on her back. You don't believe me. I understand. Luke sighed. But at least tonight, no one here needs to be afraid. She didn't answer, but ate. After the meal, Luke took a few old blankets and a jug of water and placed them near the three of them. Then he walked out onto the porch and sat down on the old bench. His hand rested loosely on the gun, as had been his habit for many years. Night fell quickly. The night wind blew through the cracks in the door, bringing with it the creaking sound and the smell of hay. The fire in the kitchen was still burning, shadows cast on the wall, four silent figures, each holding a secret that had not yet been named. Luke didn't sleep. He looked through the crack in the door and saw the Apache girl still sitting, leaning against the wall, her eyes wide open. Hair tangled, lips dry, but hands still on the leather bag. The whole cabin seemed to be holding its breath. Around midnight, one of the two unconscious girls started to get a fever. The middle girl turned over, muttering something in Apache. The older girl crawled closer, put her hand on her forehead, and whispered something in the dark. Luke walked in. Want some water? She just nodded. No request. No thanks. But she stopped doing push-ups. He handed her the water. She took it, touched it very lightly to her sister's lips, dripping each drop. The gesture, so small, made Luke pause longer than he had intended. They didn't say another word, but in the silence, something was forming. Not trust, not yet affection, just a fragile thread connecting people who had lost so much and had nothing left to protect them but each other. The scars that don't have names. The next morning, the early morning sunlight streamed through the warped wooden window, casting long streaks across the dusty ground. The fire in the stove had gone cold. Luke entered the cabin with his sleeves rolled up, his arms wrapped around a bundle of firewood, his eyes scanning the three figures still lying on the blanket. The youngest sister, the smallest one, began to stir. Her eyes opened, blinking as if she didn't know where she was. When she saw Luke, she flinched reflexively. But the eldest sister was already there, placing a hand on her shoulder and nodding reassuringly. "What's her name?" Luke asked, not expecting an answer. The older sister remained silent. But in that silence, for the first time, she seemed confused, as if choosing between keeping the secret and accepting this man's existence. "I need a name to call you. Even if it's fake," he said, his voice even. The elder sister looked at him for a long moment, then answered curtly, "Nieli." "The youngest?" "It's Sana." "And the third?" Nieli turned to look at the girl, who was still feverish, her hair wet with sweat. She lay motionless, but her chest was still heaving. "Tana," Nieli whispered, a real voice this time, not a dry protective shell. Luke nodded. "Okay, I'll remember." He reheated the water, tore the dry bread into small pieces, and divided it into 3 bowls. When he handed it to Nieli, she took it and shared it with her youngest sister first. No one said thank you, but this time, their eyes were not as wary as yesterday. Sana ate slowly, her dark eyes watching Luke's every move. She didn't speak, just looked, but her eyes were no longer filled with fear, but with careful observation, as if trying to determine, who was this man? Tana was still unconscious. Luke placed a wet towel on her forehead, then slowly swept the cabin floor, a habit ingrained in her bones by years of living alone. "You have nothing but your leather bag," he observed. "No rations, no knife, no medicine, no horse." Neely did not reply. "Are you wounded from running away, or from being chased?" Luke asked again, his voice softer this time. Nieli held the leather bag tighter. Her eyes darkened. She did not speak, but her silence was the clearest answer. Luke did not ask again. He understood the language of the hunted. Silence was not a refusal, it was a plea for survival and peace. That afternoon, Sana pulled the blanket out onto the porch, sitting close to the wall to avoid the Sunday. Her hands were still shaking, but she picked up a spoon to eat. Nieli helped Luke clear the old wood pile behind the barn. Tana was still lying in the house, her fever still raging. As the sun loomed, Nieli paused, hands on knees, breathing hard. Luke handed her the water. She took it, sip, then asked, suddenly, "Why did you help?" Luke looked out at the pasture, where the horses grazed against the dilapidated fence. "Because no one helped my wife when she needed it," he said, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "And I've lived with that silence long enough." Nieli didn't answer, but as she turned away, her hand loosened a little from the leather bag. Just a little. There were scars that didn't need to be named. They just needed someone to stand close enough long enough to not find them scary. The leather bag and the silent curse. A new moon hung quietly in the pale purple sky, and the light from the fireplace in the log cabin danced on the rough walls. Tana lay still on the bed, her sweat gone, her breathing more even. Sana fell asleep beside her, clutching the old cloth. Only Luke and Nieli were awake. She sat with her back against the wall, her eyes wide open, reflecting the firelight like deep, still water. The leather bag was in her lap, not clutched tightly like a talisman for the first time. Luke, sitting at a nearby table, did not look directly at her, but his eyes had long since learned to observe from the corner of his eyes. "What's in there?" he asked, his voice not harsh, not pressing. It was just a question between two strangers, sharing the same roof. Neely did not answer immediately. She bowed her head, slowly untying the straps. The fingers were rough and calloused, like those who had handled knives, scissors, and earth before, but now they trembled slightly, like those who were about to open a door that had been locked for a long time. Inside was a small silver totem, carved with a wolf howling at the moon, and a piece of dark leather that was scorched at the edge. Luke did not touch it, but he tilted his head, reading the ancient engraving trembling, almost faded. Nieli whispered, "Our father was the mapkeeper of the sacred hunting grounds of the tribe." She paused. The fire crackled. "Someone wanted to take the area for a deal with the army, so they accused you of treason. This piece of leather is part of the real map, and the totem a symbol that only the original keeper is allowed to wear." Luke remained silent. "We ran away with it when we knew they were going to execute you, before the full moon." Her gaze paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "Father said, if you keep it until the Council of Fire, you will live. If you lose it, you will lose yourself." Luke looked at her, longer than usual. "And now, you give it to me. Why?" Nieli looked up. There was no defense in her eyes, only the deep weariness of someone who has carried a secret for too long. "Because you didn't take it when you could," she said. "Because you quietly put the water down and left." Luke leaned back in his chair. The night wind whistled through the cracks in the door. "A week to the full moon," he said, "and a day's ride to the eastern mountains. We have no horses." "I do." For the first time, Nieli smiled a small smile not of relief, but of quiet compromise. She tied the leather bag back, as carefully as if she were folding up a piece of her soul. Luke did not sleep on the porch that night. He slept inside, on the sofa. Nieli lay on the floor near the kitchen, his two sisters beside him. Not a deep sleep, but the first sleep, not to guard each other, but to regain strength for tomorrow. Strange winds and the cavalry. That morning, the sky was strangely clear. The ground was still cracked and dusty, but the air tasted metallic, as if something were about to happen. Luke stood by the stables, checking the saddle straps and reins. Inside, the three sisters were cooking porridge with the cornflakes he had given them the night before. Tana had managed to sit up, her lips still pale but her eyes more alive. Sana swept the porch, slowly but patiently. Nieli sat adjusting the strap of his leather bag, checking every stitch and knot carefully. Suddenly, the ground shook slightly, the sound of hooves in the distance. Luke raised his head. 4 horses were approaching. The dust behind them had not yet cleared when he saw the glint of bowstrings and short axes tied to their saddles. The riders were dressed in dark leather, with long hair and red-painted faces, the cavalry of the tribe. Luke drew his rifle and walked toward the door. As the group reached the courtyard, one of them spoke up. "We are looking for 3 girls. Apache. One of them carries the trader's totem." Nieli stepped forward, standing straight. His eyes did not waver. "The totem was not stolen. We carry it to prove our father's innocence." The leader, a thin warrior with a scarred face, smirched. "Treason is betrayal. The council has set a date for judgment. You will only bring shame upon yourselves by returning." Luke stood between them and the cabin. "No one here turns away," he said, his voice like rotten wood. "You are not one of us." "No, I am one of my own, and I will not hand anyone over to someone who does not bring justice." A long silence. The warrior growled, "You are choosing to stand in the middle." Luke replied, without blinking, "I am choosing to stand." The rider turned away, spitting on the ground. "I will tell the council. If you are not here before the full moon, there will be blood." And they rode off, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. The cabin door closed behind Luke. The three girls looked at him. All three were silent, but in their eyes, for the first time, there was no wariness. Instead, the question softened by knowing the answer. Who would stay when the storm came? Blood and trust. After the cavalry left, the air in the cabin became heavier than the heat of early summer. Tana sat by the window, her arms wrapped around her knees. Sana held a bowl of porridge but did not eat, only stirring it gently with a spoon. Nieli stood still by the stove, tracing the seams of the leather bag as a way of keeping calm. Luke cleaned up the kitchen, saying nothing. But his steps were slower than usual, as if he was weighing each step. "You don't have to do that," Nieli said at last, his voice so calm it was almost sad. "This is not your fight." Luke did not look up. "Yes, but if I push you out now, I will be no different from a hunter. We are the danger." "No, you are the bearers of the truth." Silence. Then Tana spoke, softly as the wind. "If we go, we'll go tomorrow morning, before the council considers you an accomplice." Luke turned, looking at each of them. "You're not going anywhere while you're still feverish, limping, and without a gun. We're used to fighting." "No, you're used to being forced into combat." He took a step forward, sitting down on the wooden bench opposite. "I don't care how many camps you've been through, how many people have chased you. I just know that if you want to survive, this time, you shouldn't go alone." Sana whispered, looking directly at him for the first time. "So, you'll come with me?" Luke nodded. "I have horses, guns, a shortcut up the eastern pass." Nieli shook his head slightly, almost in despair. "Why?" "Because I had a family, and I couldn't protect them." He raised his head, his eyes unwavering. "I won't stand still again." No one said anything, but the three sisters' eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of people afraid of betrayal, but the eyes of people who knew for the first time they had a place to lean on, even if only for a short time. That night, Luke oiled and bandaged Sana's leg. Tana went to find more dry straw to stuff into the mattress. Nieli stayed in the stable all day, quietly combing the mane of the brown horse Luke planned to ride. The next morning, they sat eating roasted corn in silence. The wind blew through the porch, carrying the smell of burnt grass and dust. "We'll go," Nieli said, "but we won't have to run away anymore." Luke nodded, saying nothing more. The three girls stood up at the same time, as if it was a signal they had waited for each other all their youth. The pass. The sun had barely risen above the cypresses when they set off. Luke rode ahead, his rifle strapped across his shoulder. Nieli rode with him, leaning to one side of the saddle, his hand clutching the leather bag not like a talisman this time, but like someone carrying a living thing. Sana and Tana walked, still unsteady on their feet, but moving steadily. Each carried a dry food bag and a leather water bottle. The eastern pass through the pass was a shortcut Luke rarely used, narrow, rocky, and vulnerable to ambushes. But it was the only way that would get them to the Council Valley in 3 days. No one spoke all morning. There was only the sound of wind rushing over rocks and the sound of hooves hitting the hard ground. Luke glanced back at the three girls from time to time, his gaze lingering on Sana, who was still limping slightly but not complaining of pain. At noon, they stopped on a flat field shaded by an old oak tree. Nieli took out a piece of cornbread and gave it to his sister. Tana gave her share to Sana. Luke chopped wood and boiled water in a tin can. "How far do we have?" Tana asked, speaking for the first time. Luke estimated. "A day and a half, if we don't run into trouble." They stopped near a ravine where a small spring of water flowed from the cliff. That night, they lit a low fire, huddled together. Luke slept with his back to the fire, listening for every sound in the night. And then it came. Not a wolf, not an owl, but a dry twig snapping. Luke jumped up and whispered, "Get up, now." Nieli had his leather bag ready. Sana took Tana's hand, and the three of them ducked behind a large rock. Luke knelt, gun drawn, eyes darting around the clearing. The sound of hooves. And then, the cry. "Hand over the leather bag. You're alive." 4 men on horseback, their faces covered with scarves, their guns pointed straight into the darkness. "Last time. I'm not kidding." Luke didn't answer. He waited. Just one more step. Bang. The first shot rang out. From them. Luke fired back. 2 fell. 1 grazed his bicep, blood seeping through the cloth. Nieli screamed. "Luke!" He turned his head and saw Sana picking up his abandoned gun. She stood up, her legs still aching, but her eyes did not tremble. She raised her gun, aimed it at the leader, and shouted, "Back off, or I'll shoot." He jerked the reins. Seeing his 3 comrades down, he cursed, then turned and ran. The forest fell silent. There was only the sound of heavy breathing, the smell of gunpowder, and the blood on Luke's shirt. Nieli ran over. "You're hurt." "Just a graze." Sana sank to the ground, her face pale but her lips pressed together. She still held the gun, her hands shaking but her eyes brighter than ever before. They didn't sleep that night, but they were no longer 4 strangers. They were a band of survivors, bound together not just by purpose, but by blood, by fear, and by not abandoning anyone when the bullets started flying. The council and the shadow of the past. The sun had just risen when they reached the mouth of the valley. The group stood on a ledge, overlooking the hollow surrounded by bare mountains, where the tribal council held the last of the Apache's trials. A circle had gathered. Red cloth hung from wooden posts, and rosemary smoke drifted around the stones arranged in the shape of a wolf. In the center of the circle was a wooden prison post where the girl's father was being held, his hands tied behind his back, his head bowed. Nieli almost stepped down, but Luke held up a hand to stop her. "Not so fast. They must see that you have come not to destroy, but to prove." Tana squeezed Sana's hand, and Sana, her hands still swollen from the gun, kept her gaze sharp. The 4 of them entered the courtroom as if they were in a different land. The wind seemed to blow against them. The looks fell upon them, angry, contemptuous, cold. A white-bearded elder, standing in the middle of the circle, spoke. The one tied up is Tangui, who once kept the map of the sacred hunting grounds. Now he is accused of treason for marking the location of the camp for the army. Nieli stepped forward. Her voice did not tremble. "He did not mark anything. Someone else did it, and destroyed the original map to blame." A murmur arose. The elder frowned. "Do you have proof?" Nieli nodded. He opened his leather bag. He took out the silver totem and the scorched piece of map leather. "I took it back from the trader's tent after he was killed in a hunt. My father did not have time to say anything, but he hid this part of the map in my pack. It matches the part that was destroyed, and on the leather there is a special engraving that only the true keeper knows." The elder took the totem, held it close to his eyes. Silence. Then he called an old map carver in the tribe to look at it. The old man looked at him, trembling, then nodded. "It's true." The atmosphere fell. A few people exchanged glances, but there were still some suspicious looks. "Why didn't you come back earlier? Why did you run away?" This time, Sana stepped forward. "We didn't run away. We were pursued. A group of people used this crime to pave the way for a deal with the army. They want the truth to disappear with us." Luke also took a step forward. "I saw them ambushed. I saw people shooting at us. They weren't guilty. They had evidence." The elder looked at the 3 girls. Then, at the white man covered in dust, his armband covered in dried blood. "You're not one of us. Why are you protecting them?" Luke replied simply, "Because they have no one else." The circle fell silent. Then a second elder nodded. A third did the same. "We will review Tangui's charges. But the totem has been returned to the rightful owner, and the one who brought it back is your daughter." An elder turned to Luke. "This man, from now on, will be considered an honored guest, a man who stands on the side of truth." Nieli turned to Luke. For the first time, her eyes were no longer masked. There was complete trust in them. Her father was untied. He bowed before his 3 daughters. He said nothing, but tears flowed through the wrinkles of time. The moon was not yet full, but the sentence had been changed, not by a sword, but by a silver totem and unflinching courage. Fire and fields of gold. They left the council valley as the sun was high in the sky. Tangui, the father, was led to safety by two other elders. Luke, Nieli, Sana, and Tana turned west, where the old cabin stood amid the golden pastures and the stables waited silently for them. The road back seemed peaceful, but as they got closer, Luke felt more and more uneasy. "Something's wrong," he whispered, as he saw the open gate of the camp, the unfastened reins. They dismounted before the trees, hiding behind the bushes. Tana sat low, her eyes darting around the yard. The cabin door was ajar, and there were strange hoofprints not theirs. Sana squeezed Nieli's hand. "They were waiting for us." "No," Luke said, his eyes cold. "They thought we were gone forever, but now they're in our house." The four of them split up. Luke followed the fence. Nieli and Tana circled around from the right. Sana, still limping, held the pistol and pressed it against the wall of the cage. A voice came from the cabin. "They'll come back. I knew it. That totem is worth a whole lot of land." The men from the day before. The one who had ambushed them in the canyon. Luke gestured with his hand. The three girls nodded. Then, a loud noise. Bang! The front door opened. Luke rushed in first, gun pointed. Two jumped. One pulled out a knife. But Tana from the side of the door knocked him down with the butt of her long gun. Sana shot into the ceiling, the sound deafening. "Sit down, all of you." One ran, but Nieli grabbed the rope and swung it at his legs, pulling him down in the middle of the yard. The group subdued the four intruders, tying them to the fence posts with their own rope. Luke stood before them. Blood ran down his arm from the old, torn wound. "You want to sell people's land, kill people to keep your mouth shut, and you're going to burn this cabin to cover your tracks?" The leader spat. "Who are you to protect the Indians like family?" At that moment, Tana, who had not spoken, stepped forward. "Because we are family," and he was the first one who didn't turn his back. Luke tightened his grip on the gun. Then he lowered it. Evil doesn't come from knives alone. It comes from mouths and silence. The group led them onto horses, tied their hands, and left a handwritten note for the elder. These are the ones who really sold out the land. When they returned to the cabin, it was late afternoon. The front yard was covered in blood, but the cabin was still intact. Nieli stood on the doorstep. "We shouldn't have been able to go back, but now, I know this is home." Luke didn't speak. He hung the gun on a wooden hook. Then he went to the well to wash the blood off his hands. Tana hung the blanket back up. Sana sewed the tear in Luke's shoulder with dry thread. The sunset poured down on the wooden roof. The grass in the yard was golden like a sea of grain. The cabin burned with fire, and with something else that could not be named. But they all knew. They had become a family. Spring on the wooden roof. The first morning after the confrontation, the wind blew quietly through the doorway, carrying the scent of dry straw and damp earth. There was no more hurried horse hooves, no more cautious footsteps or hands constantly touching guns. The cabin lay still like a sleeping creature after a wound, not in ruins, but with many scratches that needed healing. Luke had left the house early. He fixed the loose door hinges, reinforced the collapsed chicken coop roof. On the porch, Sana folded each blanket as carefully as if she were folding her own fear. Tana, the quietest of the group, was marking a new row of furrows by the well. For the first time, she asked Luke for a hand hoe. "The soil here is more breathable than in the camp," she said. Then she bent down, digging every inch of the dirt. In the cabin, Nieli was boiling corn, no longer carrying her leather bag. The silver totem hung on the wall opposite the kitchen, next to her father's old feather necklace and a rusty nail where Luke had hung his gun. That afternoon, the four of them sat in the yard. A new fence had been built. The cabin roof had just been covered with tarpaulin. The well had been dredged. And in everyone's hearts, there was a silence, but not an emptiness. Luke handed Tana a can of water. "Tomorrow, we'll build a small shed. There are still a few long pieces of wood in the attic." She nodded, a nod full of commitment. Sana rested her chin on her hand and looked into the distance. "It's been a long time since I've seen the sky without the color of escape." Nieli smiled slightly. Then she raised her head to look at Luke. If we wanted to stay, what would you do? Luke did not answer right away. He looked at the meadow in front of him, where the three shadows had fallen that day. You don't need permission, he replied. But if you stay, this is no longer a shelter. This is home. No one said anything more, but their hearts, in the silence, beat in unison. That night, they lit a fire in the yard, a small one. Luke told an old story about the first wife planting flowers by the fence. Sana laughed and said, "Tomorrow, I will plant seeds from my mother's pouch." Tana nodded. Nieli held the silver totem in her hand, not trembling for the first time. "It's not a burden to carry around," she said, "if you know how to put it down." The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a place where people who had been abandoned could choose to stay. Home is where people don't leave each other. Spring came early that year. The prairie was covered in a layer of green, wildflowers blooming along the new fence. The skinny horses were starting to gain weight again. The well was no longer dry, and the garden in front of the porch had the first sprouts of beans, corn, and wild vegetables. Luke rehung the chicken coop door. The new wooden planks no longer creaked when the wind blew. Tana spread fresh straw for the horses. Sana mended the torn saddle with soft leather. As for Nieli, she was in the kitchen, kneading cornmeal, her hair tied up in a bun, singing an old tune. The cabin was no longer dark with fear, nor was it filled with the intermittent sounds of strangers. It was filled with footsteps, the tapping of nails, the clanking of bowls and chopsticks, soft laughter, and safe silence. One afternoon, Luke added a small porch to the right of the cabin large enough to serve as a workshop. When he turned to put the wood down, Nieli was standing there. In her hand was the silver totem chain. "You should put this away," she said, her voice as light as the early March breeze. "It's not mine anymore." Luke took it, but instead of putting it in the cupboard, he hammered another nail next to the stove right above the fireplace and hung the totem there. As a reminder, the truth had almost been lost, but no one was here to let it disappear again. That night, they dined outside. Not because it was crowded, but because they liked the golden light of the sunset. Tana put out an extra small bowl for the next guest, as she jokingly called it when she had overcooked. Sana told the story of the first time she fell off her horse and laughed so hard she rolled on the floor. Luke listened, holding the wooden bowl, smiling but saying nothing. Nieli sat close by, her shoulder brushing his sleeve. It wasn't a hasty love, just a comfortable silence between two people who had seen each other at their worst and still chose to stay. The moon was high, the wind was cool. "I used to think," Nieli said softly, "that survival was the goal. To keep your life, to keep your past, to keep your honor." Luke turned. "And now? Now I think. To live with someone and not have to keep everything to yourself. That's freedom." Sana raised her head. "Then, we are free." Tana nodded. Luke didn't say anything, but in his eyes, there was an unspoken yes. They sat like that for a long time. Not because they didn't know what to do next, but because, finally, they didn't have to go anywhere. And just like that, a cabin that had been cold all winter became a home. Not because of papers, not because of blood, but because people who had been unwanted chose not to leave each other. The old cabin on the hill stood quiet again, but not empty. What had once been a shelter for a man carrying his grief, and three young women carrying the weight of exile, had slowly turned into something greater, a home. Their journey through suspicion, hunger, fire, and betrayal had shown that survival is only the beginning. What truly matters is choosing to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Luke, the rancher, did not rescue those girls because he was strong or armed. He rescued them because he remembered what it meant to lose everything, and he refused to let another family be broken without standing beside them. And the three sisters did not endure because they were fearless. They endured because, even in the face of judgment and cruelty, they learned to trust again. Together they proved that love and loyalty are not bound by blood, but by the simple, steady act of not abandoning one another. In many ways, their story is not just about the Wild West. It is about us, about the neighbors we choose to help, the strangers we choose to believe in, and the memories we decide to carry forward. For those of us who have seen many seasons pass, We know life offers its share of storms and silences, but perhaps the greatest gift is finding, even late in the journey, that new bonds can still take root in the most unexpected soil. So tonight, as you let this story settle into your heart, remember, home is not just wood and nails. It is the courage to open your door to someone who has nowhere else to go. If this story touched you, consider passing its warmth along. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you wish, support this channel with a like, a share, and a gentle subscription. In that way, the fire we lit together here can keep burning in many more homes, across many more nights.